My name is Camille Hartley, and the first time I realized I was invisible, I was 7. It was at my sister's piano recital. Everyone was there. The neighbors, our grandparents, even my dad, who rarely showed up for anything other than golf. Everyone was clapping for Sadie. She bowed. Her curls bounced. She took a second bow, even though the announcer was already calling the next name. I had drawn a picture that day, a messy but passionate sketch of a horse, made with the crayons I'd kept hidden in my coat pocket. I'd spent hours on it. Thought maybe Mom would tape it to the fridge like she did with Sadie's award ribbons. But when I showed it to her, she smiled distractedly and said, "Kim, don't interrupt. Honey, your sister's moment." That sentence followed me for years, like a shadow. Your sister's moment. It wasn't jealousy that bloomed that day. It was clarity. Clarity that some people are born into the light, and some are trained to survive in the shade. Sadie was the firstborn. Golden, dramatic, expressive, a natural performer with a knack for needing exactly what my parents wanted to give. I was the one who learned to refill the ice trays without being asked. The one who knew where the flashlight was when the power went out. The one who fixed her own bike chain after it slipped. But in our house, being capable was a double-edged sword. If you could manage, you were expected to. If you didn't cry, they assumed you were fine. If you didn't make noise, they didn't look. By the time I was 12, I was doing the dishes every night without being told. At 14, I started tutoring neighborhood kids to earn lunch money so I wouldn't have to ask. At 16, I bought my own prom dress with tips from a part-time cafe job. Meanwhile, Sadie was quitting her 4th extracurricular because the vibe was off. When Sadie failed geometry, she got a private tutor. When I got a perfect score in calculus, I got a nice job. Honey, and a reminder to mow the lawn. It wasn't hatred. It was neglect dressed up in politeness. Indifference masked as trust. The kind that buries a girl slowly while everyone praises her for being so low maintenance. There's a loneliness in being the dependable one. The reliable daughter. You become the scaffolding of the family, holding everyone up while your own needs go unnoticed. And it builds quietly, like a pressure in your chest you can't name until it cracks something you thought was permanent. When our father passed away, a sudden stroke in the middle of April, Sadie didn't even know how to log into the online banking portal. I'd been helping him pay bills since college because he said I was good with numbers. While Sadie cried in the front pew, I sat in the back row with a funeral home invoice in one hand and a legal pad of estate fees in the other. Grief didn't hit me in waves. It hit me in balance sheets and overdue taxes. My mother, still in a haze of loss, said to me one night over lukewarm tea, "You've always been so strong. Camille, I'm glad I don't have to worry about you." That was her version of love. Delegated peace of mind. Emotional outsourcing. Sadie, on the other hand, moved back into the family home and turned my father's study into a yoga room. "I need a healing space," she said. This is too much. I remember standing in that room, watching her hang fairy lights where framed degrees used to be. Our father's scent still lingered faintly in the air, that mix of aftershave and wood polish. She didn't even notice. Later that month, the lawyer called. There had been some confusion regarding the trust. Our father had split his assets unevenly, a temporary arrangement. The attorney explained. He intended to fix it before he passed. Sadie got the house. The car, a sizable portion of the life insurance. I got the debts, the unpaid business taxes, the mortgage on the lake cabin that needed $40, 0 in repairs, and a single line from the will. Camille will know what to do. That sentence sat with me in the lawyer's office like a stone on my chest. She got comfort, I got responsibility. She got the love, I got the bills. I walked out of that office with a manila folder and the hollow echo of every time I'd been told. "You're so capable." Came that night. I sat in my tiny apartment, lights dimmed to save electricity, staring at the legal documents that made it official. I was the family's cleanup crew, even in death. And yet, in that moment of outrage, of grief layered with betrayal, something cracked not in me, but around me. The scaffolding that had held up their expectations finally buckled. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I did promise myself something. I would never again carry what wasn't mine to hold. That was the moment I stopped being invisible and started becoming undeniable. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, not out of habit, out of necessity. You see, when you've been raised to hold everything together, your body forgets how to rest even when the world falls apart. My father was barely in the ground, and already my inbox was full of bills with my name on them. But something had shifted. I wasn't just paying off someone else's mess this time. I was documenting it. Every late fee, every unfiled tax, every silent burden that had been wrapped in ribbon and handed to me like a family heirloom. I recorded it all, not for vengeance, but for clarity, for the record that no one had bothered to keep. And still, I showed up. I handled what needed to be handled. I contacted the CPA. I made arrangements with creditors. I even drove up to the lake cabin myself, took photos of the mold in the basement, the roof damage, the plumbing leak that had warped the hardwood floors. Sadie, she was healing, posting meditative selfies under inspirational quotes, like "Some souls carry storms, so others can dance in the sun." I watched her rack up thousands of likes on posts that felt like poetry written in my blood. She got sympathy for crying. I got silence for functioning. But here's what most people don't understand about quiet. Capable women. We remember everything, and we don't get loud when we've had enough. We get methodical. I started tracking the exact dollar value of everything I was doing. Not to send an invoice that would have been too easy, but to finally acknowledge the cost of the invisible labor I had performed for years. The accountant's estimate for the estate taxes, $11, $347. Time spent contacting probate court, 19 hours. Driving back and forth to my father's property to oversee repairs, 14 trips, 4 tanks of gas, 6 vacation days burned. No one saw this, but I did. Because there comes a moment, if you're lucky, when the silence you've lived in your whole life suddenly starts to echo. And that echo becomes your motivation. I began working double time at the firm, not to keep up. To get out, to break free from the narrative that being capable meant being used. At night, I read case law and watched business lectures while Sadie hosted moon circles in our father's garden. I studied financial strategies with the same hunger Edison had when he failed 1,000 times and still refused to stop. I consumed biographies of women who had been underestimated, dismissed, overlooked until they weren't. And then I did something no one expected. I applied for a leadership fellowship in sustainable urban planning. Something I'd always dreamed of, but never dared to pursue, because Camille, you're needed here. And I got in. Sadie heard it secondhand through one of our cousins. She sent me a text. Wow. Leadership, that's kinda unlike you. But yay, unlike me. No, Sadie, it was finally like me. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I had nothing left to explain. This fellowship came with a stipend, travel opportunities, and the credibility I'd spent years silently earning in rooms that never looked my way. I handed over estate duties to a professional executor. Let Sadie complain about how cold I was being. Let my mother tell relatives I was going through a phase. I wasn't going through a phase. I was going through freedom. And while they whispered, I moved one step, then another. By the time the first winter without my father rolled in, I had relocated to a city 3 states away, signed a lease with my name on every wall, and started building a life that didn't depend on anyone else's comfort or chaos. I turned my pain into structure, my neglect into discipline, my disappointment into design. And the irony, the same people who once ignored me started calling for advice. How did you afford that? Where did you learn that? What should I do with my taxes? I answered kindly. But I never gave away the blueprint. Because here's the truth no one tells you. There's a difference between being generous and being harvested. And I was done being the family orchard everyone picked from and left barren. From the outside, it might have looked like revenge. But it wasn't. It was rectification. The setting straight of a record that had been lopsided my entire life. I didn't take Sadie's comfort away. I just stopped trading my peace to provide it. There's a silence that sets in when you stop playing the role they cast you in. It's not hostile. It's not loud. It's disorienting, especially for the people who always relied on you being the one who gave in. You see, my family didn't collapse when I left. They adapted awkwardly at first, like people learning to walk in the dark. The texts from my mother went from, "Can you handle this for me?" to just checking in, "How are things?" Which, in our language, was the equivalent of an apology. Sadie, meanwhile, was struggling, not because I had taken anything from her, but because, for the first time, she had to see herself in the mirror without my reflection behind her. No more fallback sister. No more invisible cushion. Just her, and the responsibility that always somehow skipped past her, like she was wearing some kind of immunity badge. I didn't relish her struggle. I didn't gloat, because I wasn't building a life out of bitterness. I was building it out of clarity. You can't grow into who you are when you're constantly being compressed into who they need you to be. And that's what I was compressed. Pressed down into the responsible daughter. The fixer, the unpaid therapist, the one who handled the logistics while everyone else felt their feelings. But something happens when you create distance. You begin to hear yourself for the first time. Not the internalized voice of your mother, or the disappointed sighs of your father, or the needy whimpers of your sister. Just your own voice. Mine was raw at first, quiet, but it told me truths I'd never dared say aloud. Like this one, "You were always worthy of love that didn't come with a bill." And this one, "Capability is not a reason to be punished with more burden." And this one, the one that still makes my chest tighten when I say it, "You deserve to be taken care of." 2, I thought of women in history who were the backbone and the brains behind empires, but whose names were erased, whose stories were made footnotes to the men they supported. I thought of Clara Barton, Florence Nightingale, Harriet Jacobs women who bled in silence for the sake of others. And I asked myself, why do we only call it noble when women do it without complaint? So I started writing, not a memoir, not yet. Just pieces, fragments of memory, snapshots of years spent trying to earn what should have been mine by birthright: dignity, recognition, peace. Some people create art from heartbreak. I created architecture from mine, literal and emotional. I designed sustainable housing units for single mothers. I wrote grants. I sat in boardrooms and said things with confidence, even when my voice trembled. And the funny thing about competence, when it's no longer taken for granted, it becomes a superpower. I got invited to speak on panels, was offered positions where my name was printed first, and not as an assistant. The very traits my family used as justification for giving me nothing resilience. Strength, independence became the currency of my success. One afternoon, after a lecture I gave on urban development for underserved communities, a woman approached me in tears. "Your story," she said, clutching my hand. "It's mine, too. I thought I was crazy, but you described my life." I went home that night and wept, not from sadness, but from release. Because when your story becomes someone else's mirror, that's when you know the suffering didn't break you. It built you. It made you useful, not just obedient, impactful, not just efficient, visible, not just convenient. It was around that time that Sadie called, not texted, not emailed, called. I stared at her name on the screen for several long seconds, then answered. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, or maybe mine was just finally big enough to notice. I didn't know. She said after some shallow small talk, "I didn't realize how much you were carrying." I didn't answer right away, because part of me wanted to ask, didn't you? Didn't you notice when I never asked for help? When I paid the bills no one thanked me for? When I disappeared from my own life so yours could stay afloat? But I didn't say any of that, because I didn't need to anymore. And do you? "I know," I said instead. She was quiet. Then she said something that surprised me. "Do you think we could start over?" And I smiled, not because I trusted it, but because I finally had a choice. Starting over. It sounds clean, doesn't it? Like wiping the slate, like rain washing away chalk on the pavement. But nothing about starting over is clean. It's messy. It's slow. It's looking someone in the eye and knowing they still don't fully understand what they did. But they're trying, and sometimes that's enough. Not for forgiveness, but for a new beginning. Sadie didn't suddenly become someone else. She didn't stop quoting mystic influencers or forgetting birthdays that weren't hers. But she stopped assuming I would catch her when she fell. And in our family, that was monumental. My mother came next. She called one Sunday afternoon, voice brittle with careful emotion. I found one of your notebooks in Dad's study. The lists, the estate documents, all those things you were handling. Camille, why didn't you tell me it was that bad? I stood in my kitchen, hand resting on the edge of the sink, staring out the window at a cityscape I had built a life in without her. I tried. Mom, I said softly. You just didn't listen. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of years, of moments, of all the unacknowledged things between us. And then she said, I want to try now. I don't know if people ever really change, but I know they can wake up, sometimes slowly, sometimes in waves. She asked about my work. She asked how I was feeling. She didn't ask for anything. That was new. I sent her a copy of an article I'd written for Architectural Humanity, a piece about building spaces that don't just shelter people, but restore them. She texted back 3 hours later. Camille, I had no idea you were doing such beautiful work. Your father would be so proud. And for the first time in years, her words didn't land on me like pressure. They landed like rain on dry soil, still cautious, but maybe, just maybe, nourishing. I wasn't building my life to be acknowledged anymore, but being seen, finally seen, still mattered more than I wanted to admit. Meanwhile, Sadie began sending me pictures of her new apartment, her own place, her own name on the lease, a small bookshelf she'd assembled herself, an invoice she paid on time. She sent a photo of a plant she bought. I kept it alive for 2 weeks. That's a record, and I laughed, a real laugh, because it wasn't her achievement that mattered. It was that she was finally learning how to stand. The more space I claimed for myself, the more room it gave everyone else to grow. Funny how that works. All those years, I thought carrying everything made me valuable. Turns out, letting go made me powerful. I wasn't angry anymore, not because they deserved peace, but because I did. I moved again this time by choice, not escape, to a home with more light, more air, a small garden on the balcony where I grew herbs that reminded me of my childhood, the good parts. I spoke at a conference in New York. They introduced me as one of the most promising minds in inclusive design. I stood at that podium, lights warm on my face, a room full of attentive eyes, and I thought about the girl who once sat at the kitchen table, helping her father fill out tax forms while her sister cried upstairs about a breakup. I thought of the girl who paid her own college fees, her own phone bill, her own everything. I thought of her, and I spoke to her, not out loud, but in the way I stood, with spine straight, voice steady, and the absolute certainty that she didn't endure all of it for nothing. She had arrived. I had arrived on my own terms. And here's what I know now. Some of us don't get to rise until we stop agreeing to sink. Some of us don't get heard until we stop whispering. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was the written one, the recorded one, the architect of my own damn narrative. And as I looked out over that crowd, I knew I wasn't just telling my story. I was unlocking theirs. Because somewhere out there, another Camille is still being asked to carry what no one else will. Still being called strong as an excuse to give her more pain. Still thinking she has to be quiet to be loved. To her I say, you are not a container for other people's comfort. You are not a bank for their mistakes. You are not a footnote in someone else's chapter. You are the writer, the builder, the storm, the sunrise. And when the time comes, not if, but when you will rise, not in anger, not in noise, but in power so quiet, it will shake everything that thought you'd stay small forever. It was the second spring in my new city when I finally stopped flinching at my own peace. You'd be surprised how loud quiet can be when you've spent your entire life bracing for the next ask, the next crisis, the next guilt-laced phone call. At first, I didn't know what to do with calm. I kept waiting for the catch, Surely someone would knock on my door needing something. Surely a disaster would land in my inbox with my name scrawled across it. But nothing came. Just blooming lilacs on my windowsill. Just unread books finally being read. Just long walks where I wasn't rushing toward responsibility, but wandering toward joy. And in that stillness, I found something I never expected. Grief. Not for my father, not for the life I left, but for myself, for all the years I lived as a function instead of a person. For every time I translated, "You're so mature as will give you nothing." For the birthdays spent doing dishes. For the victories met with silence. For the apologies I never received and eventually stopped expecting. Grief for the version of me who thought love had to be earned in units of usefulness. Who thought being low maintenance was a badge of honor, not a warning sign. Who thought being fine was the same as being full? I wept in that apartment, not because I was broken, because I was finally safe enough to feel how deeply I'd been wounded. And feeling it didn't destroy me, it freed me. You see, healing isn't some triumphant montage. It's not spa days and yoga retreats. It's uncomfortable, disorienting, and often boring. It's learning to answer the phone without clenching your jaw. It's learning to say no without offering a 3-paragraph explanation. It's hearing your mother say, "I'm proud of you," and not needing to tape record it to prove it happened. It's trusting yourself, finally, to hold your own worth without waiting for someone else to hand it to you. Sadie and I talk now, not often, but with honesty. She's working part-time at a local nonprofit, planning art therapy programs for children. She sends me occasional updates, sometimes asking for feedback. I give it not because I owe her, but because I can, from a place of choice. My mother still struggles with the boundaries I built. Sometimes she calls and says things like, "I wish you'd come home more." And I remind her, I am home, where I am seen, where I am respected, where I don't have to shrink to fit. We're not estranged, but we're no longer entangled either. And that is progress. One day, I got an invitation in the mail from Sadie, a small envelope, and hand-addressed. Inside was a card with a simple note. "I'm opening my first solo gallery next month. You're the first person I wanted to tell. I wouldn't have gotten here if you hadn't finally said no. Thank you for not saving me." I sat with that sentence for a long time. Thank you for not saving me. It was the opposite of every dynamic we had ever shared. And yet, it made perfect sense. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't rescue. It's refusal. Refusal to carry someone when they have legs of their own. Refusal to let your silence become their security blanket. Refusal to let your suffering become the foundation they build their comfort on. I went to that gallery. I stood in the back, watched as Sadie stood in front of her work, proud, uncertain. But standing, she didn't see me at first. But when she did, her eyes filled, and she mouthed something across the room. "You came," I nodded, not because I had forgiven everything, but because I had outgrown needing retribution, and that, too, was power. As I walked home that night, the air smelled of rain on pavement that soft, clean scent that reminds you everything can be washed. Renewed? Rebuilt? I thought of the girl I used to be. The girl who thought being dependable meant being disposable. The girl who thought her worth lived in her usefulness. And I whispered into the night, like a prayer to the version of me who still sometimes visits in dreams. "You were never invisible. You were just too quiet in a world that didn't know how to listen. And now they hear you." I often wonder what my father would say if he could see all this now. The independence, the distance, the strength he always claimed to admire, but only when it made his life easier. Would he be proud? Would he say, "That's my girl," and mean it without attaching a chore or a task or a consequence to the praise? Or would he bristle at the boundaries, frown at the defiance, and call it selfishness, like so many men do when the women in their lives stop over-functioning? I'll never know, but I've stopped needing the answer. There's something sacred in not knowing, in choosing to close a chapter without needing the perfect conclusion. Some goodbyes aren't loud. They happen in the silence of a woman who finally decides her peace is more valuable than her proximity. The truth is, I didn't become someone new. I just returned to the version of myself I was always meant to be before the roles, before the expectations, before the quiet assignments of duty disguised as compliments. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped paving roads that only led one way. And from that stillness, new things bloomed. One evening, I sat on my balcony as the sun melted over the skyline, the kind of gold that made everything feel drenched in softness. And in one hand, I held a cup of chamomile tea. In the other, an envelope. Inside was a check, a grant approval for a project I had proposed: low-cost transitional housing for women, leaving emotionally exploitative family systems. I cried when I opened it. Not for the money, for the meaning, for the fact that someone out there, someone I'd never met, believed in a vision that had been born from my deepest wounds. Pain, when processed, becomes blueprint. Silence, when harnessed, becomes structure. Every overlooked daughter, every strong sister, every reliable woman who was only noticed when absent, they built this with me. I dedicated the project to the quiet ones who carried too much and asked for too little. It became a mantra I whispered before meetings, a sentence I printed on the first brick laid. And slowly, the work became legacy. Not the kind carved on tombstones, but the kind etched in lives rebuilt, in women who stopped apologizing for their standards. I met one such woman at a conference. She came up to me afterward, clutching a worn-out notebook. "Your speech," she said. I saw myself in every word. My sister always needed saving. I always did the saving. But now, I'm moving out next month. I signed a lease. I said no. I looked at her, really looked, and I saw myself 5 years ago, sitting in a lawyer's office, carrying debts and grief and confusion, holding back tears and still saying, "It's okay. I'll take care of it." And I said to her the only thing I wish someone had said to me: let them call you selfish. Let them call you cold. Let them call you ungrateful. Just don't let them call you again when they're only dialing for your sacrifice. She laughed, then cried, then hugged me. That moment, that transfer of courage, was worth more than any inheritance I never received. Because courage, once claimed, is contagious. And Sadie and I, we're not close, but we're honest. And sometimes that's all you need. She texted me last week. "Mom said you're building something incredible." I told her, "You always were." There was a time when I would have held that message against her. Now, I just let it sit, like sunlight on skin that once flinched at warmth. Because here's the final truth I've come to live by. You do not have to become what they needed. You are allowed to become what you need. And in doing so, you give everyone around you a choice: evolve or be left behind. My sister got the love. I got the bills. But now I have something far more powerful. I have me, not the muted version, not the efficient version, not the caretaker in the corner of everyone's story. The whole me, the woman who stepped out of the role and into her own name. Camille Hartley. Builder, writer, daughter of no one's guilt, sister of her own salvation. And for the first time in my life, I'm not exhausted. I'm free.